Hey guys, this video is going to go over the 2017 FRQ number 3. So with this one, we have this phrase class, okay, and we have this string called current phrase that we're going to be working with. The constructor is just creating a new phrase object and just setting current phrase equal to whatever that phrase might be. So current phrase is what we're going to be using in these other methods that we're developing. So the one thing I want to point out is that the find nth occurrence method doesn't actually have any code shown, and you're not writing any code for it. On the AP test, they do this sometimes where you just assume that this method works as they tell you it works. We're going to be using this method in our other ones, even though we don't have any code for it. Now, what you have to understand is what this method actually does. What it's doing is it's finding the nth occurrence of string str in the current phrase. So n represents the occurrence. So if we had n equal to 2, it would find the index of the second occurrence of string in current phrase. So n is representing the occurrence number, not the index number. This method returns the index of the nth occurrence. Now that's important because that's gonna come up later with part A and part B. Now part A is actually working with the replace nth occurrence method. Now notice we have 3 parameters here. Okay, str is the string that we're looking for in current phrase. N is representing the occurrence number. And then REPL is the string that we're going to replace the nth occurrence of str with. So we need to actually use the find nth occurrence method inside of this method here, even though we don't know exactly what the code for find nth occurrence is. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create an integer that's going to store the index of the nth occurrence of the string that we have as our parameter here, because I need to know the index so that I can do some substring work to kind of piece together this this new phrase. So I'm just going to make an integer. I'm going to call it OCC for occurrence. And what we're going to do is we are going to call the find nth occurrence method. And we've got to give it its parameters. So str is what we're looking for. N is the occurrence. So what's going to actually be stored in this int here is the index of the nth occurrence of str in the current phrase. So with that information now, we can go ahead and we can find like the beginning part before that nth occurrence. We can find the last part, which is everything that comes after the nth occurrence of that string. And in between, we're just going to put the replace string that we have up here. So the thing that we need to check for first is we need to check to make sure that the nth occurrence actually exists. So we're only going to do this stuff to it if the nth occurrence of the string actually exists. So if it doesn't exist, that would mean that the find nth occurrence method would return a -1. So we're just going to say if occurrence does not equal -1, then we know we're good to go. So now we can find the first part. So I'm going to make a string called first part of current phrase, and it's going to be equal to current phrase dot substring, and then we're going to start at 0, and we're going to stop at occurrence. So remember, with the substring, it's the first one you want and the first one you don't want. So I want to start at 0. I want the first, or I should say, the first thing I don't want is the index of occurrence. So this is going to give me everything that comes before the nth occurrence of that string. Now, similarly, I'm going to create another string here called last part. But this one is just going to start right after the nth occurrence of that string and go to the end here. So we're going to do occurrence, so that's the index of occurrence. And then what I'm going to do is plus the string length, because if I'm starting at a certain index, I'm going to add the length of that string I found so that I know where to actually pick up. Like I'm basically looking or finding the first index after that string stops. So this is how you would do that. The occurrence of where it starts plus the length. So this is going to start the last part here. This substring is going to start right after that string ends. Now, with all of this, we can now go ahead and we can piece together our new current phrase. Oh, okay. So we're just going to do the first part plus that replace string plus the last part, and that's it. We're not returning anything because this is a void. We are just basically replacing that string with a new one. So we are basically just updating the current phrase variable. So that's it for part A. Now for part B, we are working with the find last occurrence method down here. So what we want to do is we want to find the last occurrence of this string that we have as a parameter. So you want to pay attention to what we should be returning here. We're returning an integer, but what is that integer that we're returning? It says that this method returns the index of the last occurrence. So we're not trying to find if this string occurs once, twice, 3 times, or 4 times. We want to find that, yes, but we're returning the index of that particular last occurrence. So we're going to be, again, using the find nth occurrence method to help us do that. So first of all, we want to check and make sure that this string actually exists in the current phrase. So I'm just going to do an if statement. If find nth, oops, not last occurrence, find nth occurrence of string, and then remember the other parameter here is the number occurrence you're looking for. So if the first occurrence of this string in current phrase equals -1, that means that the string doesn't exist in the phrase at all. So if that happens, we're going to return a -1 because that's what they told us to do. Okay, returns -1 if the string is not found. So if that if statement is triggered and it returns the -1, it's just going to stop. It's not going to do anything else. If it's not equal to -1, it's just going to keep moving forward. So now we're going to do a while loop, and we're going to set n equal to 1. So n is going to represent the number occurrence. So we're going to start at the first occurrence, and we're going to say while find nth occurrence of str and n+1, and I'll explain why this is an n+1 here in just a second, does not equal -1, we're going to increment n by 1. So this while loop is just finding the last occurrence. Okay, so whether that's 1 times, 2 times, 3 times, 4 times, whatever, it's just finding the number occurrence. So here's why I have an n+1 here. If it gets to this point, if it actually makes it to the while loop, we know that the first occurrence exists. So I set n equal to 1. Now, I want to check to see if the second occurrence exists before I increment that up and make n equal to 2. So we know n equals 1 is good. So here we're checking to see, hey, does the second occurrence exist? If it does, we're going to increment it up. Now n is 2. So then when it loops back through, n is 2 now, we know the second occurrence exists, and then we're checking to see, hey, does the third occurrence exist? If it does, it increments up to 3, and then it checks to see if the fourth. Well, if the fourth occurrence doesn't exist, this while loop stops, and we're going to have that n value equal to 3. So then we know that there's only 3 occurrences of that particular string, and then we can go ahead and find the index. So the while loop is only finding how many occurrences there are. It's going to give us the last occurrence. So then, since we want to return the index of the last occurrence, I'm going to make an integer that I'm going to call index, and it's going to be equal to, let's see, find nth occurrence of that string at n, because remember, n is the last occurrence. So in this case that I just kind of rambled through here, our last occurrence was 3. So this would be finding the index of the third occurrence of that string in current phrase. So it's storing that index in our variable here that we made, and now we just need to return it. So hopefully you found this video helpful. If you guys have questions or concerns, reach out, and have a great day.